Okay, hi everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming to the CBCS weekly seminar. We're very lucky to have people from Noosa Council talk to us about their biodiversity and their biodiversity research needs and the management of biodiversity in the region. I won't go through long introductions. Rebecca's going to start us off, and maybe we'll self-introduce yes, if you stand here, you're good, or sit there, and then she'll introduce the other speakers as she goes along. Thanks.
Okay. Just in terms of slide changes.
That button, yeah.
Is this one here? Okay, gotcha. Hi, everyone. My name's Rebecca Britton. I'm the Environment Manager acting at Noosa Council. I've been at Council for a couple of decades, so seen many changes and lots of reasons to celebrate. And that's why we wanted to talk to you today, is to run through some of the practical examples of successful work that we've done there, some of the learnings, some of the challenges, and then also some of our aspirations around research projects and opportunities where we really feel like we want to tap into latest science and make sure it's applied in real life examples in a location that's really open to innovation and best practice. So I'm here with my colleagues, Camille Oliver, who coordinates our environmental planning land-based program, and Cheyenne Barman, who coordinates our climate adaptation as well. And each of us will talk about the different areas of our programs at the council. So an acknowledgement to country, we work on Kabi Kabi Gubbi Gubbi land, and to our south is Jinnabara land as well, acknowledging that them as custodians of the land, and we hope that we can contribute to that custodialship through the work that we do, recognising the long history they have and the ongoing learnings we can have from their land management practices. So I think most of you know where Noosa is. Over that away, on top of the Sunshine Coast. Why the location is significant as well is because we're at the northern extreme of a rapidly growing growth corridor, a lot of population pressures, a busy tourism industry that's ever growing, and the challenges of managing conservation estates and public lands for that growing demand. We have a lot of small micro businesses, and we see there's a real opportunity to leverage the type of investors that come to the Noosa region, and to, as part of our economic development program, to look for green industries that can work on real solutions for biodiversity, environmental management, climate risk. So working actively to look for those synergies and partners in that business space as well. So merging across what might have been traditional environmental conservation work within the council more closely with our economic development team, so that we can be more holistic in the way that we approach our biosphere management. So we have a set of sustainability principles that run across our programs, across each of our economic, social and environmental programs. And again, there was that siloing effect that was happening in our organisation for many years. The sustainability principles was saying, you know, we need to look more broadly, more holistically, and each of our policies and strategies as they're developed seek to embed those principles to make sure there's a closer alignment and integration across all of our programs. And it's always a work in progress. And I guess with every organisation, university be the same, there's a real embedding process of reteaching, learning as new people come through. We have a high turnover at the council. It's important that as part of induction that we make sure that staff have the opportunity to understand the philosophy of Noosa and what drives it, and the community values that also drive the programs and activities across the council, because we really are representative of a broader community sentiment and and drive. And we have many other programs and activities that each of us will talk through. Rather than jumping in now, I guess we can just reflect on the vision of Noosa is this different by nature, and it's probably that philosophy that we wanted to highlight as a bit of a point of difference. Local governments have a set of functions under the Local Government Act, but how they actually put that into practice can be very different. And for what we've come from is a place where the community has driven really strong environmental advocacy, have campaigned for the protection of national parks, that have protested in the Mall of Brisbane to make sure it retains its autonomy and its independence from the broader Sunshine Coast. So that means that what we have at the political sphere is also potentially a set of councillors that make decisions on behalf of the council and the community that come with that same sentiment. So it's part of the success of what our programs can develop, can roll out, I guess, is a drive from the community, but also in that political sphere that we have councillors that are really on board. And we've seen that most with our climate change adaptation program, that what might have been a really hard sell in some councils, and it has been a really hard one, bringing them along, understanding the climate risks that we're faced with, understanding some of the solutions as applies to local governments. We've been lucky to have councillors that we've been able to bring along, show them from their different perspectives, from an economic and environment perspective, social perspective, the benefits of being really prepared, and the importance of being proactive around taking action around climate change. So it's been a really new program, I guess, if you think new in terms of the last 7 years, of where we've been able to show some leadership because of the willingness from our councillors and the support from the broader community. I don't think I'm following any of your slides, Shay, but so Noosa Shire was designated as a UNESCO Biosphere in 2007 because of that seeking of balance between environment, social and economic aims. And, it's always a work in progress, but that aspiration's been really important, and it's also recognition of the hard work that's happened before, but also means the biosphere that we can work in collaboration with other biospheres around the world and share learnings on that. What it means in a practical sense is that we can connect with a broader research community that, it's sort of, there's a, how do I put it, like a shared ethos around being part of a biosphere, that we're all sort of working towards a shared aspiration. So that we also have our biosphere reserves to our south and to our north with the Great Sandy up Rainbow Beach and beyond, and then to our south with Sunshine Coast and the ranges there. So I think there's lots of opportunity there for us to work better together and to look at the region more broadly rather than just at that Shire-wide basis. Because when you think about conservation biology, as you all know, of course it crosses Shire boundaries. Of course, it needs to be looked at a regional level. So, so much more there for us to seek from that broader regional scale. Some other notes there. Yeah, when we look at it from a planning scheme perspective, I come from a town planning background and regional planning. That there is a planning scheme that's been in place for 20 years that has enabled good sensitive development to occur, that strikes a balance between the natural environment and the built environment. So we've talked about making sure that buildings don't go above the tree line, the top extent of the canopy of the trees wherever possible. And there's examples where that hasn't occurred, but that's a general flavour of trying to get that low rise, low key, not traffic lights, not big city symbols, to try and have that sensitive development that fits in with the natural environment and respects it. So that the council still owns that philosophy some 20, 25 years later, and it's embedded in subsequent planning schemes to the current one. So we have 42% of the Shire protected as national park or environment reserve or conservation area. This is huge when you consider it in terms of the proportion of the broader protected area estate across Queensland. And that's been a real collaborative effort. We've got community organisations that raise funding, that contribute to major conservation acquisitions. With the recent Ural Ringtail State Forest conversion over to national parks was a success story of a coming together of state government, Noosa Council and the Noosa Parks Association, who are a community not-for-profit group. A third each share in buying 2,000 hectares of state forest and restoring it, converting it over to national park, working with Kabi Kabi to help do some of that restoration and land management. And then we also have carbon offset arrangements in place relating to getting economic benefit from that restoration effort, and also koala corridor connectivity as a major benefit coming out of that restoration as well. Council has a levy that gets levied to each ratepayer every half year. That money gets pooled and is used for acquisition of conservation lands, potential conservation lands. So for example, we've got about $3.5 million at the moment in that environment levy pool, and we're actively looking for land across the Shire that we can purchase that will then go over to National Park and help connect up our corridors across the Shire. So really exciting. That's Camille's job. She gets one of the best jobs in council, to spend lots of money on really cool blocks of land. So and a very good negotiator to purchase those. So 71% of the local government area is vegetated. So that's across private and public land. So we work with our private property owners, those that are willing and interested to restore their own properties as well through land for wildlife programs and voluntary conservation agreements, which is sort of like a binding agreement with the landholder. Means if they pass the property on, it then carries forward to a potential property owner by agreement and can be there secured into perpetuity. So it's not always about protecting public land, but protecting private land where we can as well. How am I going for time? Oh, good. So we've got some important guiding policies. We've got the environment strategy that was prepared a couple of years ago. It talks about waterways protection, land-based biodiversity protection, broader sustainable living goals and aspirations, and climate change adaptation. So it's the coming together of everything that sits under that environment arm. We have an economic strategy and a social strategy, and ideally they talk to each other. And so, yeah, that embedding and cross-pollination is really important across our program areas. Under that, there's a climate change response plan, and we have a zero emissions target as part of that plan. So by 2026, so this is exciting and very ambitious for us to get to zero net emissions in the next couple of years. That's largely about council's own emissions, but also a broader aspiration around the community. So Shay will talk some more about that. And then the Noosa plan is our planning scheme. So development being one of our major threats to biodiversity in our environment and ecosystems through land-based clearing. That planning scheme's super solid. And we've got examples where past legacy projects has meant that we've seen significant conservation land cleared for development. But on the whole, we've had a fairly good track record where the planning scheme stood up in the court by way of a brave council that says no and has pushed back, where we're not going to lose our significant forests. We're going to protect it for conservation. These areas here under a population cap arrangement will be available for community benefit. The remainders to be protected and restored. It's a really clear policy approach there through the planning scheme. I have to read the slides here now. This is some of the targets in the environment strategy, if you can read it from the back of the room, about where we want to be by 2030. We want our natural ecosystems to be improved. We want no net loss of ecosystem values. We want half of land in Noosa Shire to be managed for its conservation values, which we're pretty much at now. And we want our populations of key threatened indicator species to remain viable. And Camille will talk about our threatened species restoration program soon. And then goals under our waterways management program. Under biodiversity, same slide, so I won't read that again. Under sustainable living, so talking about being carbon neutral, being sustainable in the way that we design and operate our built infrastructure, converting green waste and food waste, or diverting it from the landfill, I should say. Looking for sustainable building outcomes, and councils don't always have much of a say when it comes to sustainable building design because it's set within state legislation, but we have a really important role in advocating to the state for changes to legislation. So that's where sustainable building outcomes are really important, and equally for the community in that advocacy role as well, to advocate to the state for improvements to sustainability, because it's, I won't harp on about it, but unless there's voices creating the change, it doesn't happen. Stating the obvious, but some of our advocacy efforts are creating important waves, and as a collective voice across local government or collectively across the community, old ways of doing things are shifting and can shift. So always encourage that advocacy in the sustainability space. And then Shay will talk about some of the climate change programs shortly. And I think that's where I hand over to you, Shay. Yeah, is that good enough? Oh, good going. All right, okay. Some of the themes, if you ever wanted to jump into that plan, it's fairly broad. In this rivers and coasts part of our environment program, there's a few different elements here. We've had a stakeholder advisory committee that's been a difficult one to manage, but you know, the importance of getting that community voice into government is so key. And despite the challenges, we still do it because you're bringing together boaties, you're bringing together environmental, interests, and people who are interested in safety, interested in fishing, all together in a room to nut out what are you going to deal with, what are you going to prioritise for our Noosa River. It's a really difficult conversation, but we're always worthwhile to get that point of view. We have a water quality monitoring program. We dropped down our water quality rating for the Noosa River this year. You remember the floods in March and May last year. We had a lot of sediment come down our catchment and into our river. We're still seeing the results of that. The water quality monitoring program is really important for each of our streams to understand where, where those sediments are coming from, what our in-stream biodiversity is looking like, how it's faring when we have major events like this, and the important learning for us as these major events increase over time to improve our understanding of how we can manage the catchment better to continue to maintain that water quality and catchment health. We got algae and seagrass investigations, litter net and cleanup activities, a foreshore management plan, which deals with our open coast locations. So from Peregian up to Sunshine Beach, looking at how that coastal reserve, that's public land, can be better managed, how we can restore the dunes for climate change. How do we get good, resilient dune vegetation to protect the dunes as sea level rise increases into the future? And also more storm events as well, impacting upon that, that open coast location. So a really important plan, that one. And some various other ones there. Fish barrier remediation might be of interest for those who are interested in aquatic ecosystem health, where we have barriers from bridges, from roads, looking at our capital works program at council and seeing as we renew or improve upon our infrastructure, how can we make sure we still allow for fish to come upstreams where they might not currently be able to because of in-stream barriers. Expensive project to deliver, but really important. So doing some initial steps around prioritising where in our streams we can try and enhance fish passage. Lots of management issues for the river. Seagrass is in significant decline, benthic biodiversity in decline. So lots of good work to do. And this is Camille. Hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be back. I graduated from UQ in 2011, so it's been a while, but yeah, it's wonderful to be back. I've got lots of good memories here. So I commenced at Noosa Council about 3 months ago now, and I've got a background in private consulting and also state government, mainly around aquatic ecology, but I've also done development compliance as well. So my focus at Noosa Council is mainly in the planning and policy space, in the flora, fauna, and the terrestrial landscape. So I'm also obviously responsible for the acquisitions of conservation land, which was a big draw card and why I came across to Noosa Council, because working in development assessment, I'm very aware that I think the main way we can protect biodiversity is through acquisitions. There's only so much, unfortunately, research can do, but we need to protect the landscape that's there, and offsets aren't the answer either. So we've got some amazing projects underway, which we've had UQ involved in as well. So the first one is a threatened fauna recovery roadmap. So that's currently with council for endorsement. But as Rebecca outlined, as part of the Noosa environment strategy, there was key targets around threatened fauna. And this roadmap, I guess, looked at prioritising where council should invest resources and which species we should focus on. So as part of that, there was a decision matrix and stakeholder consultation with an expert panel. And then there was 9 species identified, which I'll go on to on the next slide. But the next stages of the project will be developing action plans on how those species could be managed. And obviously, you know, there are iconic species within those Noosa 9, but we also want to try and leverage opportunities to pull in other species which aren't as iconic, but are as important in the region. The other project that we've got underway, we're around 50% complete, is the review and update of the regional ecosystem and high value regrowth mapping, which Vanessa is leading. So basically this is refining the state mapping to the 1 to 25,000 scale. And this will be really important because it'll obviously feed into those planning decisions and reviewing that planning scheme, because what we're finding is that mapping isn't accurate, and trying to get an accurate picture is obviously important for our conservation land plan, but it also feed into climate change assessments in the future. So it's a really high value project, that one, and will be updated by the Queensland Herbarium in October this year. So that's really exciting. Another project that we're in year 2 of is the koala monitoring using drones of the Ural ringtail with QUT. And that has had some interesting initial results, with an increase from 34 koalas in 2021 to 66 koalas in 2022. However, around those results, we need to do some further analysis, because it seems like that is not a natural population increase. It's obviously potentially other harvesting operations that are drawing koalas into that rehab area. So we have applied for further funding to extend that beyond 2023, but we'll see how we go with that one. The other area we're looking at is an offsets policy and guideline, and typically Noosa has not wanted to go into this space because, you know, offsets should be the last option in development, but you know, there is unfortunately a need for it, and trying to do that in the best way possible is something we're looking to do, and trying to tie that also in with the conservation land plan to try and have those offset areas connecting protected areas is the ultimate goal. And finally, we've got a Koalas on the Move program, which is with the Noosa Biosphere Foundation, which is vehicle signage, so the flashing signs on 4 roads. It was a trial this year, and that's had also some really good results where we've had no koala strikes on those 4 roads, whereas previously we've had about 20 koala strikes in 2021. So that's another area that we're really keen to expand on. That obviously that community engagement, citizen science is a really important and developing area, and where we can leverage our resources better. So in terms of the Noosa 9, these are the key species that have been identified. The loggerhead turtle will be the first species that we're looking to develop the action plan for. And then we've still got to determine which species will come after that. And that will obviously depend on grants that are available. There's a lot of funding available at the moment around koalas. But, you know, acid frogs, water mouse, Mary River turtle, we've also lodged a grant with MRCCC and BMRG to look at improving monitoring in 6 Mile Creek, because we don't have a lot of data in that area of the Mary River. So, yeah. But we would be keen to get some thoughts on, you know, if you've got projects come up that could potentially feed into those action plans. It'd be really wonderful to have your thoughts and potentially technical reviews of the action plans once we've developed them, as Hugh did with the roadmap. So in terms of upcoming projects, I'm looking to review the offsets policy that's been drafted, which Hugh has also had some preliminary conversations around that. Carbon sequestration approaches, the environmental levy policy to allow flexibility around acquisitions, because at the moment it's quite specific and you have to have a certain land parcel size, you have to have connecting to adjacent protected areas. So trying to make that more flexible to allow offsets areas and that sort of thing. So that will be interesting to see what happens. We're working also with Sunny Coast Council because they've just updated their acquisition policy as well to allow more flexibility. And obviously just the development of the action plans will be the next focus for the next 12 months. So key opportunities and gaps that I can see UQ potentially providing assistance with is the identification of suitable prioritisation approaches for land acquisitions. So it's something I'm really interested in, and something I was involved with Melbourne Water in a project with, trying to find, I guess, the best approach that's fit for purpose for Noosa Council, but not just looking at the Noosa Council region, but across a landscape scale, because councils at the moment are doing this differently and state governments are doing this differently. So we've had conversations with DES to try and have a look at how they've done their prioritisation approach. They're only looking at regional ecosystem mapping at the moment. So trying to pull in threats and constraints is really key as part of that process, and where there's very poor data as well, particularly around weeds. And also climate change impacts on specific species. How do you manage that? You know, where's your refuge areas, that sort of thing. So that's a key focus. Another one is looking at building relationships with other councils and state and federal government departments to try and increase collaboration and deliver improved outcomes, because everyone's doing this work, but it's trying to get those conversations happening on how can we have a consistent approach and deliver better outcomes with the limited resources that we've got. and share data, because the state has data that we just don't have access to, vice versa. We've got local data. So data is king with this sort of project. So trying to get that collaboration is key. Increasing support also for the Noosa Biosphere Foundation. They do an amazing job, particularly in the community awareness space, but trying to progress the aims of the UNESCO Man and Biosphere program, and how they currently support research projects at the moment, and looking at opportunities there would be wonderful as well. And finally, also increasing engagement with the traditional owners, the Kabi, and looking at protected area management and how we could ultimately look at a cultural landscape strategy or something like that, with integrating cool burning and other traditional practices is another key area I'm interested in. So yeah, so thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we can develop some further partnerships together. And I'll hand over to Shay.
Thanks. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll fly through these 2 slides really quickly. But my name is Shayan, and I'm the project coordinator of climate change adaptation at Council. I've been in the role for just over a year in strategic planning. That's the branch I work in, but I report to Rebecca. And so, yeah, just a quick overview of our climate adaptation work as it relates to conservation. So a couple of the guiding frameworks and priorities for us: we have a set of adaptation principles that were developed in consultation with the community. And if you go on our website and have a look at them, they're very much focused on nature-based solutions. People want to protect nature and use nature as best as possible to build resilience, which is great. So it gives us a mandate, because we know for nature-based solutions, it's incredibly important to us, because we know that we're in an extinction crisis. We're in the 6th mass extinction, and biodiversity loss is a huge problem. At the same time, we have the climate crisis. And so nature-based solutions, trying to marry the two and trying to solve the two together, is one of the key focuses for our program. So ecosystem-based adaptation, with some of the projects on the left, is key. We use dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's the 3rd dot point on the right, but basically it's an approach developed out of Netherlands to make decisions under uncertainty. And so we know with climate change, there's huge uncertainties, but this approach makes it flexible. It makes it community-based, and it allows us to set a pathway forward for how we're going to adapt to certain situations and uncertainties now. So it's a really good framework that we've been using, particularly with our coastal hazards adaptation plan. Community-based adaptation, particularly with Indigenous and youth, is incredibly important. We need that diversity of knowledge. We know that the Kabi have so much to offer, and we can't leave any groups, vulnerable groups or marginalized groups behind. And so effective adaptation requires that community-based approach. So in terms of the ecosystem-based adaptation project, we have a few really exciting ones. One is the coastal wetland prioritization study. So I came across Val's great research at NESP last year and got in touch, and Val was interested to apply her prioritization approach to Noosa. So we've partnered with Val and Maddie, who's doing her PhD, and she's going to do a study for us on prioritizing where we can restore our coastal wetlands. First, for biodiversity resilience. So we know that sea level rise, storm tide, and coastal erosion are going to impact our biodiversity, but also for blue carbon, also for cultural heritage, also for water quality in the Noosa River. And so when I was searching for approaches, I wanted one that sort of looked at all the co-benefits, and that's key for adaptation planning, is looking at those co-benefits. Because at the end of the day, government, we are government representing people, so they're going to prioritize adaptation actions for human systems, but we want to make sure that we're bringing nature along as much as possible, building resilience within nature and making sure that we're addressing biodiversity loss. And so it was great to see that Val had developed this framework and approach that assesses co-benefits. So yeah, that's the coastal wetland prioritization study. We've got a great project with Australian National University where they're developing the first national guidelines for nature-based solutions for flood resilience. So we focused in on 3 sites across Noosa Council, along with 12 other councils that they're working with, but they're using 3 sites in Noosa as case studies for nature-based solutions for flood resilience. Living Foreshores Noosa, so we've just got state government funding to build living foreshores in our urbanized areas along Noosa River, and using, the natural system to improve resilience and protection from sea level rise and storm tide inundation, storm tide flooding. Urban greening program, we've started this in the last 2 months, and we are next financial year, so after June, we're going to do a big master plan for urban greening. Right now, we are looking at how do we expand urban greening across the Shire, looking at biodiversity connectivity, but also looking at heat risk reduction. So where are those opportunities to introduce greening for shade, but also for transevaporation? And so we want to make sure that we're bringing in multiple elements into our consideration about where we're going to prioritize urban greening opportunities. So that's a really good project, an exciting project that we're making headway on. Groundwater monitoring at Kalula. So this is a project with UQ as well. Maddie Daring, she's not here. Oh, there. Okay, I've never met you in person. So hey, Maddie. Yeah, so this is a great project. You guys all probably know about it, but another great project with UQ that we're supporting, and hopefully we'll put out some groundwater monitors, some sensors soon in Kalula National Park. And we want to get a better handle of the importance of groundwater for groundwater dependent ecosystems up there, and also for water security perspectives. A lot of our water comes out of the Kalula Bay subbasin, and so it's really important in terms of climate change adaptation planning. So sustainable and regenerative agriculture, this has both obviously a mitigation and adaptation component to it, but we have key targets in both the climate change response plan and the environment strategy around building regenerative ag. And I'm really focusing on agroecology specifically. And we have strong targets there. We haven't been able to dedicate a huge amount of time on it because of capacity, but it is something that we're very interested in. And so if you guys, one of the gaps I identified here on the left is looking at what sustainability frameworks we can use for measuring progress towards agroecology, towards regenerative farming in Noosa. We do have a considerable number of farmers and grazing and horticulture. And so looking at what frameworks are available for measuring and monitoring and evaluating sustainability in agriculture is really important. One of the gaps we have right now, we've done an assessment on biodiversity vulnerability to coastal hazards, which is part of the reason why we decided, well, the next step is looking at where can we restore coastal wetlands for biodiversity resilience. But we haven't done any assessments on biodiversity vulnerability, any detailed assessments on biodiversity vulnerability to other climate change impacts. And so one of the key areas where we would like to go is whether we develop a biodiversity adaptation plan. We want to assess vulnerability to multiple hazards, so multi-hazard analysis. Can we get to the scale required for decision-making at the local level? I don't know whether I don't know if bioclimatic envelope models and species distribution models are of the scale that would be applicable at the local level yet, and whether we can do that. And that would be something great to talk about now. And then, yeah, climate ready conservation is something that CSIRO has been sort of advancing with local governments. And so if you guys if you've come across that and have some ideas on climate ready conservation, it's from the reading I've done, it looks like it's more of an approach to workshopping with key stakeholders and community members on how to advance climate ready conservation within your local government area. Biocultural restoration is hugely of interest for us. So we know active and passive restoration are important, but what strikes me about biocultural restoration that's so cool is that it's not just going to restore a landscape, it's restoring the human relationship with the landscape. So that restoration effort doesn't die down in 5 or 10 years with the changing population. That relationship is long lasting, and working with the Kabi and our Indigenous custodians is incredibly important there because they have so much to teach us. And then, yeah, so that's basically, those are the opportunities, challenges. You know, often I come back to Hugh's value of information framework, you know, because we do collect data and we do invest money in data collection, but how much data is needed before you can make decisions? We know how big the problems are and stuff. And so, having an easy way of assessing, okay, this grant's coming up, we want to collect more data on this subject. How much data do we really need for decision making would be really useful. There's been a large focus on recovery instead of resilience. We know that for every dollar you spend in resilience, you save $10 in recovery and damage costs, but government funding has been 97% on recovery and 3% on resilience thus far. There's a huge shift in that happening now with the new Labour government, which is great. And so, I've mentioned most of those. I suppose in general, and this is a finding that IPCC had across the planet, that our adaptation efforts and mitigation is inadequate for the speed and scale of changes that we're feeling on the ground, the impacts. And our adaptation is incremental with only some examples of transformative action. But I will say that from my perspective, Noosa Council's planning scheme, our town plan, there are elements of it that can be seen as transformative. And we do have a very strong, as Rebecca mentioned, a strong mandate from our councillors and our community to implement policies and development arrangements that are transformative in the adaptation space. So yeah, thank you.